gentlemen, well, let the first public words that I have spoken on Irish ground be words of thankfulness to you for your cordial and generous welcome. You cannot, believe me, be more glad to see me than I am to see you. And I'm quite sure beforehand that you will be as easy and open with me as I shall try with all my heart to be with you. And I therefore earnestly hope that you will respond to any emotion that my stories may be calculated to call forth. Weep, laugh, cry, applaud. You need be under no apprehension whatsoever of disturbing me. During my stay here in Dublin, I have taken my fill of the monuments and the beautiful public buildings, but have been keeping a wary lookout meanwhile in the rag and bone interest. And I have found them. The rags, the bones, the sawdust and the dirt, which I was at first unable to discover in Dublin, but I have found them now. Not in Sackville Street, or Westmoreland Street, or fashionable Merrion Square, nor yet in St. Stephen's Green, but in the Coombe. And if a man wished to abstract himself from this world, to place himself beyond the possibility of any inducement to look out of the window, he should go to the Coombe. Now I did not know that the Coombe was the Coombe. I staggered out of it again, dazed and bewildered from a labyrinth of streets. And the following, if I may, is an account of my having, well, staggered back in again. I found the Coombe itself running from the bottom of Francis Street and Ardee Street to Pimlico, and possessing vomitoria seemingly innumerable in the shape of lanes, back streets, courts and blind alleys, to be a thoroughfare with a strong dash of Brokers' Row in Birmingham, Newgate Market and Petticoat Lane, but with an almost indescribable aspect of dirt and confusion. First, the old clothes. The Coombe's tributaries and subsidiaries don't teem but swarm, don't swarm but burst with old clothes. There's a shop out of 100 where the clothes are so thickly sewn, so deeply heaped that their proprietors, squatting amongst them, smoking their pipes, look like bundles of old clothes. Oh, well, they're little else themselves. Every imaginable article of male and female attire seems to be clustered together in this shop. The broken windows have old clothes stuffed into their shattered panes. The sleeping department is walled off by a screen of old gowns and wardrobe. The wind is excluded by old stockings thrust into chinks, sleeveless coats laid at the bottom of doors. There's a remnant of a shawl for a carpet, the remains of some undergarment for a tablecloth, and old clothes for counterpanes. All the mortals who sleep in the dry valley of bones seem to have left their garments here, and you may see yourselves retrospectively in a mirror of rags. Here is the black-brimmed hat with the black plume that you wore at your father's death. Here is the black coat you married your first wife in, and here in dank sable tatters is the frock coat you wore at her funeral. Here in the Coombe are all the boots and shoes you ever wore. And there is, ladies and gentlemen, a reason for this extraordinary accumulation of old clothes, not only in the Coombe, but in every back street of Dublin. No. It appears to me that the Irish, from the numerous class of petty shopkeeper to mechanic, are, it is patently obvious, universal wearers of old clothes. If you had seen what I have seen here in Dublin, at what climax of suffering and destitution these poor people were first reduced to this degrading strait is yet to be discovered, but are content to wear second-hand garments, not only outer, but inner and under. The extraordinary exodus, which every year takes tens of thousands of Irishmen from their native shores, creates a huge demand for second-hand wearing apparel. And a newly arrived emigrant without money or some wardrobe, however tattered, would soon have to go as Adam did. And some poor creatures are only enabled to cross from Dublin to Liverpool at the sacrifice of a waistcoat, a shirt, or a shawl sold for anything they don't fetch. But I digress, dear friends. I digress. It was the Lord Lieutenant whose carriage I stopped to see sweep out of the vice-regal yard into Dame Street, who was the primary cause of my wandering Coombe-wise. However, a personage somewhat removed from him in appearance and worldly station was the secondary lodestone that pointed me to this particular pole. This was no other than a Dublin fishwoman, very much disguised, rather undisguised, in rage and alcohol, who was scattering the flowers of her eloquence broadcast on a female with a barrow at the door of a whisky shop. Now, the casus belli being a disputed question as to the right of property in a flat iron, here called a smurth. And if you'll pardon my attempt to replicate the dialogue, the conversation went thus. Isn't it the smurth that's mine? And, sure it's not a skilly covet that's yours. Were bandied about for some time, until the dealer in molluscs, straying from the point in question, as one does when arguing, referred to some previous griefs and torts. Isn't it yourself? Demanded this female Demosthenes. Isn't it yourself that didn't go to the chapel for be Father Macanassa for badgee every break of it? And isn't it yourself that came down to the corner of the Coombe only last Wednesday fortnight for Linz to hold woodland and called me a maudlin or excommunicated gasometer? With which latter trope she folded her arms and stared oyster knives at her enemy. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, concluded my few exhausting hours in that quarter of your fair city, observing the semi-continental picturesqueness, overpopulation and frowsiness, perfectly original and peculiarly its own. My father, John Dickens, was committed to a debtor's prison, and I was forced to live in the back attic of a slum, not unlike the Coombe. It's not surprising, therefore, that I grew up with a bitter sense of humiliation. However, pride, despair, burning ambition, call it what you will, drove me to develop the senses that God had given me. There was not a sight or a sound that escaped my observance. The ludicrous, the lovable, the pathetic, the grotesque. All had a human story to tell, and my ambition was to breathe life into each and every one of them. Bah! Humbug! Merry Christmas, Cratchit! Huh? What reason have you to be merry? Huh? What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough. And what's Christmas time to you, eh? A time for finding yourself paying bills with no money. Another time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking of a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. And that creature this morning, in letting my nephew out, let two others in, looking for Marley. Marley's been dead these last 7 years. Dead as a doornail. In fact, he died 7 years ago this very night. Well, they informed me, these two, that at this festive season of the year, it was more than usually desirable to make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at this present time, of the hundreds of thousands who are in want of common comforts. Are there no prisons, Cratchit? No union workhouses? Oh, good. Oh, good. The poor law and the treadmill are in full vigour then, are they? Excellent. You see, I contribute to these beautiful institutions. And if they don't like that, sir, then let them die and decrease the surplus population. Well, I don't make merry myself. I'm not trying to make idle people merry. Oh, and I suppose you want all day tomorrow, Cratchit, being Christmas, Well, it's not convenient. Oh, if I was to stop you £0.50 for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. And you don't feel me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. Poor excuse for picking a man's
pocket every 25th of December. Oh, out upon Merry Christmas. If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding, buried with a stake of mine through his heart. Well, it should, and that would be a merry and a bubbling Christmas for him. And yet, there was a time when I could have had my own household. To have had a daughter sit down at her own fireside. To have called me father. And to have been a springtime in the haggard winter of my life. Ah, but these are but shadows. Mere shadows of things that could have been. Are there no workhouses? The time is past for all debate as to whether there should ever have been workhouses here in Ireland. There they are. And I'm reliably informed if they'd not been there, the greater part of the population of Ireland would have gone long ago to that narrowest house of all, underground. A whole network of workhouses now exists right across Ireland, and they do provide sustenance and employment. Sadly, one recent and infamous atrocity has cast a general gloomy suspicion over such institutions. One London warehouse, I beg your pardon, workhouse, it might as well have been a warehouse, became a notorious baby farm, from which children were groomed for slave labour. In 1849, a cholera epidemic broke out and spread rapidly due to the overcrowding, and as a result, 118 children died. Another anomaly is that very often the dishonest felon is often better looked after, provided and cared for than the honest pauper. But this should convey no special implication on the system itself. On the contrary, I have seen much to recommend them. Pauper children looking robust and well fed and obviously the objects of very great care. An infant school, a large, light, airy room at the top of the building is somewhat agreeable. However, the Irish workhouses were unable to absorb the shock of that great and recent tragedy of the famine. Until lately, houses as fragile as mud huts were exceedingly common. Now, I do not mean, and I wish I did, that wretched dwellings were few in Ireland. They are fearfully common still. The wrecks and ruins of mud hovels not quite melted away remain as mournful objects on the landscape. I have seen them. And it is too well known what would be found under the rubble of some of them. The bones of the families who died in the famine being buried by having the roof tumble down upon them, no other burial being possible. Oh, shadows indeed. But I will remember the shadows of my own family. While still a small boy, I was sent out, oh, not to a workhouse, no, but to a blacking factory, to be as useful as I could. Still living alone, every day passing that dreadful Marshalsea prison, knowing that my father was in there. My room itself, which was filthy, contained nothing but mutilated crockery. There was not the vestige of a carpet, a curtain, or a blind. Not even a closet, and the water communication was frequently cut off. However, it was agreed that when my father's debts had been paid off, I was to return home, to work no more, and to receive an education. Now, my father has much to regret. But I cannot forget, never will forget, never shall forget, that my mother was warned for my being sent back to that factory. Oh, she did teach me to read. Oh, yes. But that was all the education I received until I was a young man. Received at the hands of, yes, benefactors and educationalists. Men of facts and realities. Men who proceeded upon the principle that 2 and 2 are 4 and nothing over. In this life we want nothing but facts, sir. Nothing but facts. Thomas Crabbe Ride.
benefactor and educationalist. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts, Mr. McChokum child. Facts alone are wanted in life. Nothing else will ever be any use to them. Plant nothing else, root out everything else. You can only form the minds of reasoning animals upon facts. This is the principle on which I bring up my children, and this is the principle on which I bring up these children. The scene was a bare, monotonous vault of a schoolroom, his school, and he intended every child in it to be a model, just as all the young Gradgrinds were models. Facts, Mr. McChokum child, facts. Thomas Gradgrind and the schoolmaster swept with their eyes the inclined plane of little vessels, then and there arranged in order to have imperial gallons of facts poured into them until they were full to the brim. Right, now, girl number 21, 22. Girl number 22, give me your definition of a horse. Oh, girl number 22, unable to define a horse. Right, some boy's definition. You. Quadruped, graminivorous, 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 12 IT, 4 incisive, shed coats in spring, in marshy country, sheds hooves too, otherwise hooves hard but requiring to be shod with iron, age known by marks in mouth. Right. Now girl number 22, you know what a horse is. Now let me ask you boys and girls a question. Would you paper a room with a representation of horses? What do you mean, boy, you wouldn't paper it? You'd paint it. You must paper it. I'll tell you then why you wouldn't paper a room with a representation of horses. Do you see horses walking up and down the sides of rooms in reality? In fact, well, do you? Of course, no, boy. Why then? You're not to see anywhere what you do not see in fact. You're not to have anywhere what you do not have in fact. What we call taste, just another word for fact. This is a new principle, new discovery, a great discovery. And now, if Mr. McChokum child will proceed with his first lesson, I shall be happy to observe his mode of procedure. Oh, Mr. McChokum child began in his best manner. He and some 140 other teachers have been turned at the same time on the same principles at the same factory like so many pianoforte legs. Mr. McChokum child has volumes of subjects, hundreds of head-breaking questions. Is that not so, Mr. McChokum child? Oh, aye, Mr. Gradgrind, aye. Astrology, etymology, geography, orthography, and general cosmography. The compound sciences of algebra, proportion, land surveying, levelling, drawing from models, and vocal music, and all the very tips of my fingers. Oh, he knew all about the watersheds of all the world, whatever they are, and the names of all the mountains and all the rivers, histories of all the peoples, and the manners and customs and products of all the countries, and their boundaries and bearings on the 32 points of the compass. Oh, Mr. McChokum child, if you'd only learned a little less, how infinitely better you might have taught much, much more. Oh, yes. I took a carriage ride in the Phoenix Park this morning. Our coachman had not a complete piece in his coat bigger than a penny bread roll. But he was extremely intelligent and agreeable, and there was not a subject on which he did not have something to say. But he had received that natural education of life. And as we drove into the Phoenix Park, he looked around it as if it were his own. You consider this a park, sir? Oh, it is that, sir. You know, gentlemen been all over Europe tell me they never seen the equaling of it. 8 mile round, 10.5 mile across. And in the month of May, the hawthorn blossom is as beautiful as bright with their white jewels on. And I said, if there's peace to be found in this world, a heart that was humble may hope for it here. But Thomas More, your favourite poet, Mr. Dickens. Huh. Over yonder's the Viceregal Lodge. In them 2 corners is the 2 secretaries. wishing I was one of them.
And the amateur band which heralds in St. Patrick's Day in the stand beyond's a sight to behold. Well, the resultant cacophony resembles some semblance of unanimity, urged on by 2 or 3 old ex-militia bandsmen, the civilized allies, as it were. And the everlasting cadences vanish and return upon the auricular horizon. Fresh air and out of doors is a cure for all, Mr. Dickens. Oh, and that air is that so. And that scenery is that so. And them's mountains is them so. You'll never find a scene like Dublin's mountains green, wet knowst the hills between with brooks. Consider this a park, sir. It is that, sir.
And as we drove back to my fashionable hotel at the corner of Nassau Street and Dawson Street, the hotel boots cleaner, who had failed to appear earlier that morning, appeared now, alone, triumphant, and empty-handed.
Are you back, Mr. Dickens?
So it would appear, I informed him.
And is it true you were a friend of the great Daniel O'Connell, Mr. Dickens?
Yes, I was much taken with his speeches during the passage of the Irish Coercion Bill.
No, but and is it true he vowed never to read another book of yours after you'd killed off poor little now?
Mr. O'Connell boasted of many things.
And is it true he fired the book out of his carriage window?
Mr. O'Connell could be waspish at times.
Now, and what stories are you going to be reading while you're here, Mr. Dickens?
The Christmas Carol, the chimes, the boots at the holly tree, which brings me back to my boots.
And what sort of a house do you expect to see in, Mr. Dickens?
I informed him that the booking appeared to be admirable, as it is so transpired.
Well, the Lord be praised for the honour and glory of old Dublin,
says he, and vanished yet again. Just as suddenly his head reappeared around the corner.
I hope you don't mind, but I showed a gentleman into your room while you were out this afternoon, Mr. Dickens.
It was no gentleman. It was my brother Frederick, my dissolute sibling. He'd had the audacity to follow me to Dublin, and inform me that I seemed to have made myself very comfortable during my stay here, and in the next breath that once more circumstances had prevailed against him, whilst the gods continued to smile upon me. And then, with the benefit of an excess of brandy, accused me of being, what was it? Oh yes, a great observer of the destitute, and making much profit from it, entertaining those who live off these very creatures. I was tired, I was hungry, I was in no mood for his cleverness, and then he preferred to be blunt. He was once more short of ready cash, and had already been threatened with the same fate as that of my father. Such a wasted life. Oh, I had made provision enough for him on more than one occasion. However, I drew a £5 note from my pocketbook, and I promised that I would ask the concert manager to make an advance on my next performance reading. He knew I would relent. I always did. For no other reason than it always weighed heavily on my conscience that I'd been terribly hard on him. But life had been hard on us all. Just after he'd gone, with time running short, there came a prodigious knock at the door. Who is it?
It's your boots, Mr. Dickens.
Oh, yes. Another hotel boots cleaner of my acquaintance, later elevated to a gentleman's gentleman, was far more fastidious in his duties, and could be seen one Christmas Eve afternoon outside the George and Vulture Hotel in London, attempting to insinuate into the fore boot of a coach a huge codfish several sizes too large for it. There we are. Now we're all neat and compact, as the father said when he cut his little boy's head off to cure him from squinting. Here, Mr. Pickwick, we've left the huge codfish to the last, so it may repose in safety on top of your real native oysters, announced Sam Weller. And then, as brisk as bees, if not quite as light as fairies,
the four Pickwickians attained the outside of the Muggleton coach, well wrapped up in greatcoats, shawls and comforters. The coachman mounts to the front, Mr. Weller jumps up behind, the helpers pull the horse cloths off, and the coachman shouts a cheery, "All a righter!" And away they go. The wheels seem to skim over the hard and frosty ground, and the horses, breaking into a canter at a sharp crack of the whip, step along the road as if the coach, passengers, codfish, oyster barrels and all were but a feather at their heels. And at 3:30 that afternoon, they all arrived, safe and sound, high and dry, hale and hearty, on the steps of the Blue Lion Inn at Dingley Dell. Now, Mr. Pickwick was busily engaged in superintending the disinterment of the huge codfish and busily counting his barrels of native oysters, when he suddenly felt himself gently pulled by the skirts of the coat, and on looking round to discover who it was that was using this mode of trying to catch his attention, found none other than Mr. Wardle's favourite page, better known to those of you who are familiar with this unvarnished history by the distinguishing appellation of Joe the Fat Boy. Said Mr. Pickwick. Said the fat boy, and he chuckled joyously as he glanced from the codfish to the oyster barrels and back to the codfish. He was fatter than ever. "Well, you look rosy enough, my young friend."
"I've been asleep right in front of the tap room fire."
He'd heated himself to the colour of a new chimney pot in the course of an hour's nap.
"Master sent me over with the shay cart to take the luggage up to the house. Well, he would have sent some saddle horses, only thought you'd rather walk, it being a cold day."
Oh yes, we would rather walk. Oh yes, I remember last year how we travelled over the same ground. Oh, no. Yes, we would rather walk. Sam, sir, help Mr. Wardle's page put the luggage into the cart, man, and then drive on with him to Manor Farm. Meanwhile, gentlemen, we will walk forward at once. And Mr. Pickwick and his friends struck off across the fields in the direction of Manor Farm, leaving Mr. Weller confronted together for the first time with the fat boy. Mr. Weller looked at him with great interest and suspicion, but without saying a word began rapidly stowing the luggage away into the cart, while the fat boy stood by and thought it a very interesting thing to watch Mr. Weller working by himself. "Well, there they are," said Sam, throwing in the last carpet bag.
"Yes, there they are,"
said the fat boy with a contented smile, and then proceeded to lay himself affectionately down by the side of the huge codfish, and placing an oyster barrel beneath his head for a pillow, fell instantaneously asleep. Well, of all the cool boys what I've ever seen, this here young feller is the coolest. Come on, wake up, young Dropsy. But as young Dropsy evinced no returning signs of animation, Mr. Weller sat himself down in front of the cart, and starting the old horse with a jerk of the reins, jogged steadily on towards Manor Farm. Meanwhile, Mr. Pickwick and his friends, having walked their blood into active circulation, turned into a lane they had to cross, when suddenly they found themselves right into the very centre of the party who were expecting them. There was old Wardle himself, looking jovial, if such a thing was possible. And there were some 8 or 10 young ladies. But if they were sociable and happy outside the house, what was the reception when they reached the farm itself? Oh. The very servants grinned with pleasure at the sight of Mr. Pickwick and his friends. "Oh, Lord," said Emma the maid. "Here, is it true, my dear, that family has games in the kitchen tonight?" "We always have games in the kitchen at this time of the year, Mr. Weller." "Oh, I never seen such a sensible old man as Wardle, or such a regular gentleman."
"I doubt that he is,"
said the fat boy, joining in the conversation.
"I doubt he breathed nice corn."
The fat youth gave a semi-cannibal-like leer as he stared at Mr. Weller and thought of the roast legs and the gravy. "Ah, you're awake at last, are you, young 20-ton? Here, make yourself useful. Go over there and stick a bit of Christmas in them pies. Go on." No, t'other side. No, officer. Put that pie down. That big one. That's been put by for somebody else. I'll tell you what it is, young boa constrictor. If you don't sleep a little less and take a little more exercise, when you comes to be a man, you will lay yourself open to the same sort of personal inconvenience as what was inflicted upon the old gentleman as what wore the pigtail.
What did he do to him?
I'm going to tell you. He was one of the largest patterns as was ever turned out. A regular fat man that hadn't caught sight of his own shoes in 45 years. No, that he hadn't. And if you were to put an exact copy of his own legs on the dining table before him, he wouldn't have known them. But anyway, he always walks to the office with a great gold watch chain hanging out about 1.25 foot, and in his fob pocket a gold watch as was worth, I'm afraid to say how much as a watch could be. Great heavy manufacture. Big for a watch, as he was for a man. And with a great round face in proportion. Here, you better not wear that here watch, says the old gentleman's friend. You'll be a rock on it, says they. Oh, will I? Says he. Yes, you will, says they. Oh, well, says he. I'd like to see a thief as can get this here watch out, because I'm blessed if I can, it's such a tight fit. And if I wants to know what's the top, I'm obliged to stare into the baker's shops. And he begins to laugh all very hearty as if he's going to pieces. And out he rolls again with the powder dead and the pigtail, the great chain hanging out further than ever, and the big gold watch nearly bursting through his grey kersey smalls. Do you know there wasn't a pickpocket in all London that hadn't had a pull at that chain? The chain would never break, the watch would never come out, and they soon got tired of dragging such an heavy old gentleman along the pavement. And he'd go home and he'd laugh till the pigtail vibrated like the pendulum of a Dutch clock. Anyway, one day he's rolling down the Strand, and all of a sudden he sees a pickpocket, as he knows by sight, coming up arm in arm with a very little boy with a very large head. Here's a game, says the old man to himself. They're going to have another go, but he won't do. And he begins to chuckle very hearty, when all of a sudden the little boy lets go of the pickpocket's arm and he rushes head foremost right into the old gentleman's stomach. And for a moment doubles him right up with the pain. Oh, murder! Yeah, you're all right, says the pickpocket, whispering in his ear. And when he's come straight again, the watch and the chain is gone. And what's worse than that, the old gentleman's digestion was all wrong forever afterwards to the very last day of his life. So you just look about you, young fellow like that. Make sure you don't get too fat. At the conclusion of this moral tale, with which the fat boy seemed much affected, he then procured for his own use and summarily devoured the huge pie that had been put by for somebody else. Force of habit, a well-worn phrase, which is often left to incarceration and imprisonment. Talking of which, having attempted to walk my own blood into active circulation here in Dublin, consequently, in a healthy suburb, I was drawn by the two huge tower-like chimneys of that model jail known as Mountjoy prison. Model? Oh yes. For here I discovered that the wholesome terrors of the silent system and the separate system are put in use. Now the secret of this unique Irish system lies now in giving each prisoner a separate cell. He's no longer deemed to be a name, he's no longer deemed to be a number, he's held to be a human with a soul and with feelings and reason. It is then hoped that by graduated steps he climb to a happier freedom. At first he's kept on a low diet and given menial tasks. After a few months his diet's improved and he's given more interesting work, and then his final years are spent on open probation. And on the wild common of Lusk to the north of Dublin can be seen the strange sight of prisoners working in open-air husbandry. This is a unique Irish system, and the streets of Dublin are now the better for it. However, the streets of London which I still ceaselessly walk in search of inspiration. To be beheld at the height of their glory should be seen on a dull, dark, murky winter's evening. And there's just enough down gently floating down to make the pavements greasy. Fog everywhere. Fog in the eyes and mouth. Fog on the river, hovering in the rigging of ships. Fog rolling and polluting the city. Most people are at home in bed on nights like this, but others have more pressing business, and only emerge when they can blend more naturally into the fearful shadows that are cast in this uncertain gloom. Men cast from a vile matrix. Men who would consider a prison like Mountjoy with an easy and a familiar leer. One such, buttoning his greatcoat tight round his shriveled body and pulling the collar up over his ears so as to completely obscure the lower part of his face, emerged from his den. Glancing suspiciously around, he struck off in the direction of Spittle Fields. He crossed through several streets and alleys, till at last he came to one lighted only by a single lamp at the farther end. At a door in the street, he knocked. A dog growled.
It's only me, Bill, my dear.
Bring your body in then, Fagin.
Oh, such a cold night. Oh, and such a wind, Nancy. Oh, it seemed to go right through, Anne.
Oh, yeah? Well, it must be a piercer if it can find its way through your heart.
Very good, Bill. He's such a card, ain't he, Nancy? You're such a card, Bill.
Give him a drink, Nancy. Makes my body sick watching his lean old carcass shiver.
No, thanks, Nancy, no. Well, just a... Thank you, Nancy. Well, that's better. Now I'm ready for business.
Oh? What business?
You know, Bill, the job. The crib. But Chertsey, you know what I mean, Bill. He knows what I mean, don't he, Nancy?
No, he don't. Or he won't, which is the same thing. Why don't you come out straight and call things by their proper name, don't stand in and blinking and talking in nods and hints. As if you weren't the very first to have thought about the job.
Somebody might hear.
I don't care, let him in.
But it's just my caution, that's all, my dear. It's my caution, nothing more. When's it to be done? Oh, such silver, such plate silver, Nancy.
It's not to be done at all.
Not to be done? Then the job hasn't been properly gone about. Not to be done. Don't tell me.
Oh? And who are you not to be told, eh? Well, I'll tell you. Toby Crackett's been hanging about the place a fortnight, and you can't get one of the servants to step out of line. Oh, God. If I'd only kept that young lad, Ned, the chimney sweeper's son. You kept him small on purpose. I had him out by the job. Oh, but then the Juvenile Delinquent Society comes along, don't they, eh? And teaches a lad to read and write. Takes him away from a job when he's earning money. If they'd enough money, thank God they haven't, we wouldn't have a boy left in this business in no time at all.
No. No more we should, Bill, my dear. No more we should. Oh, such a pity to lose so much when we had our hearts set upon it. Oliver. What about Oliver? He's the boy for you, Bill, my dear. Oh, mark my words, I've had my eye upon him. Depend upon it. He's a safe one. And do anything you want, Bill. That is, if you frighten him enough. Oh, the other's no use to me at all. They're too big. I've had my eye upon him close, my dears, close. Let him think he's one of us, then put it into his mind that he's been a thief. And he's ours. He's ours for his life. Oh, what else could I do, eh? Send him out with the Dodger and Charlie? I had enough of that at first, my dears. I trembled for us all. But no, Bill. This couldn't have come about better. Besides, others are no use to me. Not worth the taking. Their looks convict them. But with this boy properly managed, I could do what I couldn't with 20 of them. And how much better is this bill, eh? Than having to put the poor little boy out of the way. What about Nancy? She ain't want to blab, is she? Oh, good. Well, I know what these girls are, but we can't upset her. You mustn't upset her, Bill. Yeah, when's it to be done?
I arranged with Toby the night after tomorrow, if he heard nothing from me, to the contrary.
And there's no moon? Oh, good, excellent. Well, good night, Nancy. Watch her, Bill. The worst of these women is it only takes a very little thing to call up some long-forgotten feeling. The best of them is, it never lasts. Ah, no, Bill. The boy against the man against the boy for a bag of gold.
It was there and then solemnly arranged that Oliver should be unreservedly consigned to the care and custody of Mr. Sykes, and that the said Sykes should deal with him as he thought fit. These preliminaries concluded, Mr. Sykes began to drink brandy at an alarming rate, fell over a box that lay on the floor, and went to sleep where he fell.
Good night, Nancy. Oh, God. Good night, Bill.
The Jew again bade Nancy good night, and bestowing a sly kick upon the prostrate form of Mr. Sykes, while Nancy's back was turned, wended his way downstairs and groped his way through mud and mire to his gloomy abode.
Oliver? Oliver, where are you? Are you abed? Oliver, I want a word with you. Ah, there you are. Now listen, Oliver. You are to be taken to the residence of an old friend of mine, Mr. Sykes. Now take heed, Oliver. Take heed. He's a rough man and thinks nothing of blood when his own is up. So whatever falls out, say nothing and do as he bids you. Mind now, mind. There's a candle for you to burn. There's a book for you to read till they come to fetch you in the morning. Good night. Ah, Oliver. When Mr. Sykes... You're fast asleep. So pale. So pale, he almost looks like death. No, not now, Oliver. No, not now. No, you sleep well till tomorrow, Oliver. Till tomorrow, my dear.
I said earlier that my mother taught me to read. I often believe that some divine hand taught me to write, taught me to deflect the current of mournful reflections, lost love, lost innocence, my lost childhood, taught me to live in hope of something beyond that time and place, taught me not to be weighed down by the stale and dismal oppression of remembrance. And yet there are still times when it concerns me greatly to know how sorrowfully my pen is laid down at the end of an imaginative task. It's as if I am diminishing myself back into that shadowy world. The saddest dream that was ever dreamed. Life. Now, I do not speak angrily or resentfully of my past, for I know how all these things came together to make me what I am. Consequently, I drive myself ever onward, choosing to remember the low fiery sun behind monastery ruins, behind ditches, behind dikes, the wind through the great elms, the light through them as they shed a gust of tears, the changes of glorious colour, through the boughs as the flecks flutter and dance like wings, the earthy odours, scents of gardens, fields and woods, my secular home and my spiritual home. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honour for me to present a few of my cherished ideas before the people of Dublin, and in consequence I have achieved an amount of artistic delight which perhaps it is given to few men to know. Now, the stars their early vigil keep. The silent hour is near, when drooping eyes forget to weep. Yet still we linger here. However, from these garish lights I must vanish now, with a heartfelt, a grateful, a respectful, and an affectionate